This episode of The Havery Show is being brought to you by Heartland Tax and Accounting, 863-385-5020. The following program is rated PG and may contain language and material that may be slightly offensive to some audiences. With us today on The Havery Show, we have lifelong friend, father to some of my very closest friends, local attorney, local businessman, entrepreneur. We have a lot to talk about today. Mr. Michael Swaine is with us today. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
How are you?
Better than I deserve.
So, let's go back to your origins in Sebring. When did that begin?
1972.
And you moved from?
Bartow.
Tell me a little bit about that.
I was practicing law in Bartow. Well, they'd moved the office to Lakeland with a firm called Holland Beavis, Smith, Kibler, and Hall after I'd graduated from law school in 66 or 65 in December. And we lived in Bartow. And I had, at that time, two boys, Mike and Will. And they were highly allergic, apparently, and we did not know that. They were allergic to phosphate dust.
No kidding.
Yeah.
And you're in Bartow, of all
in
places.
Bartow, the center of all the phosphate.
Yeah, absolutely.
We found out early in the summer of 72, when the kids and Mary were over in Anna Maria, and the guy with two other couples, and the guys were going back and forth. We'd go to Anna Maria on Friday night and be with the families there, and then we'd go back to Bartow and work on Monday morning. And so we spent 3 weeks over there. The boys were not sick at all. They were happy. Everything was wonderful. We got back to town, and the next day had to put Mike in the hospital with upper respiratory problems.
No kidding.
And the pediatrician's name was Dr. Red, and I was at the hospital, and I said, Dr. Red, what in the world is going on? And he said, you don't know? They're allergic to phosphate dust and phosphate fumes. And it had never dawned on us.
Were you near a mine?
No, but Bartow is in the middle of all of it.
Sure, absolutely.
It's not as bad as Mulberry or some of those little towns, but it was something. So we started trying to figure out what to do. We immediately, my wife's family had a little lake house over at Crooked Lake on Lake Wales. Mm-hmm. So we immediately packed up, moved up there, and it was just a little summer house. Started talking about what to do. And I went and talked to the firm's head partner, who's a guy named Chesterfield Smith, and went and talked to him, and he said, well, we can move you to, we had then, at that point in time, had merged into a big firm in Tampa, Knight, Whitaker, Jones in Germany, and so it now became Holland and Knight. And he said, we can move you to Tampa office and get you a house over on I can't remember the name of the island right there in downtown. And we checked on that and found out that wasn't going, with all the industry right there, that wasn't going to help much. Mm-hmm. And then there was a article in the Tampa Tribune that listed the top 10 towns as far as air quality in the interior of the state. Mm-hmm. And guess where Sebring was? Right up there on top. Yeah. So we thought, well, that's interesting. And in the meantime, Gus Smith and Ellie Self, who lived here, mm-hmm. And my father-in-law, who was a partner of Gus in Grapefruit Company, were in the process of building a houseboat.
A houseboat?
Houseboat out at 4E Fish Camp. Wow. And it was 44 feet long, 20 feet wide, slept 8 of your close friends, had a kitchen and a bathroom and all that. But we built, and I was coming down with my father-in-law on weekends and helping. not much, but help contributing something anyway, picking up and moving things. And working on the houseboat was Legree Smoke, fire chief,
Yep.
Donald Hamlin, who was a fire lieutenant, O.L. Rollerson, who was the sheriff,
Yes.
Dr. Bowley.
Dr. Bowley, yeah.
Dr. Bowley.
These are great names.
Oh, boy.
I haven't heard them in a long time.
Oh, boy. And they were all involved in helping build the houseboat. It got built about the time we found out about the illnesses. And I had been invited to go with them to move it from Forey Fish Camp. Well, they moved it from Forey Fish Camp down to a little marina by Okeechobee,
Okay.
right by State Road 70.
Yep.
And then they were going to take it to Chokoloskee,
right.
down to Everglades City.
Yep.
And so I was invited to go. And that same crowd of people, including Bob Dundy, who was the county attorney, and Jug Heston, who was chairman of the county commission, and OL and everybody, went on the houseboat. We went across Okeechobee, spent the night at a little marina on Okeechobee, then went down to down the Caloosahatchee River, and spent a night at LaBelle on the Caloosahatchee, and then went down to the bay, down to Fort Myers, before you get to Punta Rassa, and anchored out and stayed there for a night. And then next day ran down the outside down to Marco Island.
Oh, wow.
And then from Marco Island the next day went to Chokoloskee.
I'll be darned. That's quite a trip.
So you're on that boat with all those guys from Highlands County, all those days and all those nights, and having great time and funny things happening. And Bowley and Gus fell off the boat in Lake Okeechobee. I was driving, and this boat had two 200 horsepower Evinrude motors, one in the front and one in the back. It was a pontoon boat.
Yep.
The pontoons were 4 feet by 4 feet and 40 feet long.
Those are serious pontoons.
They're serious pontoons, and you drove it from the top of the boat. You're driving setup up there. It had had a steering wheel for each motor and a throttle for each motor.
Wow.
You could turn it in its own length if you just reverse the two. And
I'll be.
anyway, we were going across Okeechobee, and Jug Heston came running up on top where I was and said, "You need to turn around." And I said, "Why?" He said, Bowley and Gus fell off the back. Gus and Bowley fell off the back of the boat. I said, "Excuse me?" And he said, "Gus and Bowley fell off the back of the boat." And I said, "I'm not turning around." He said, "You got to be kidding, they're going to drown." I said, "Jug, they're not going to drown. This is like 3 feet of water. 4 feet of water out here in the middle of this dadgum lake." And I said, "As soon as they figure out to stand up, they'll be fine." And he said, "But you got to go back and get them." I said, "How many boats are we pulling, little boats?" He said, 2. I said, "Can you drive one?" "Yeah." I said, "Go get them." And he did. And it was funny because they get them back on the boat. I'm still going across the lake. Gus comes up and said, "Did you tell him you weren't going to come back and get us?" I said, "Yes, I did. He's a good man."
Oh, wow.
But we had a great time. I got to know all those guys. And then all of this stuff about the sickness came up shortly after that. So you see God's hand in it just moving pieces around. And so I called, I can't see what's his name. Anyway, one of the lawyers here I knew, and said, "What do you think if I would come down and open up an office?" And he said, "I think it'd be great." And he said, "When I came down, there were 16 of us, and when you come down, there'll still be 16. I said, "Well, thanks a bunch." He said, No, I meant one of them left."
Uh-huh. So what practice was that? You're the first practice that you were in?
You mean where?
Or in Sebring, when you moved to Sebring.
Yeah.
What was the name of that practice?
It was just J. Michael Swaine, attorney at law.
All right. Okay. So you started your own right away.
Yep.
You didn't join in with anybody. Okay.
Didn't know. The only one I knew was Frank Bryant. And
Gotcha.
and he was just about retired at that point in time. That no, I didn't even think about going to anybody else. I just came down. Gus and my father-in-law had hired, at the same time he hired Gus and brought him down, he hired a young guy named Lamar Carlton and to run a lab for the citrus. They were in the citrus business. And so I came down, I stopped down and visited with Lamar, and he said, Dr. Foster has an office fixing to be vacant in his building on Commerce, right down from the courthouse.
Yep.
Where the Soil Conservation Service was located. They're now being transferred back to Tallahassee. He said, go talk to him. So I did, and he said, oh, I'd love it. You come on in, I'll give you 3 months rent-free if you'll fix the place up, because it's kind of nasty with those guys in there. And so I said, okay. And so I went and made my peace with the firm, and they said, fine, said, Chesterfield said, well, you're going to have to take all the files you've been working on and finish them. You bill us, we'll pay you, and then you will bill the client.
Yeah.
Too much noise on phones. So I said, that's great. That gives me about 6 months of work to do before I need to start bringing in additional clients too, or while I can. So I made the deal with Dr. Foster. He said, by the way, the guy who runs the Soil Conservation Service wants to sell his house. And he said, here's his address, go see him. So I went out there and found out they just listed it with a realtor. And I talked to the owner, and they said, I'll sell it to you for $30,000. And we had a buyer to buy our house in Bartow for $36,000. So we cut a deal, and so I had a house and an office. So we moved down to the house. I go to the office. I had the fellow who provided the furniture and business supplies to Holland Knight firm had come by shortly after I told everybody I was leaving, and told me and gave me a catalog and said, look, you're going to need stuff when you get down there. Call me, I'll be glad to get them for you. And I said, look, I don't know when I'll be able to get enough money to buy some of this stuff. And he said, don't worry about it. Pay me when you can. Okay. Wow. Okay. So I had called, I'm in the office doing something, starting to fix something. And Gus Smith and Ellie Self show up, and they go, what are you doing? And I said, well, I've got to get new carpet. I've got to paint this place. I got to cut a door here. I got to close that door over there. And they said, go home and get cleaned up. We need you to do some legal work for us, and you can't do that when you're doing this. And okay. So I go to the house, change clothes, come back, and then there's Eldridge Pollard measuring for carpet. They had a painter in there who I'd already picked out paint. So there was a painter in here already painting, and the guy was cutting in the door.
Wow.
And, they just took care of it. So here I am.
What a situation to have all fall together so seamlessly.
There's only one way.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, amazing, really.
Only one way it happens.
And did Dr. Boley end up being the caretaker for the allergy situation, or how did that just resolve itself?
They didn't have it anymore.
It was done. It was over.
It was done.
Wow.
They came here, and none of them have any allergies.
It's Dr. Boley in the Fountainhead. Was that Dr. Burley? Who was in the Fountainhead?
Burley. Boley was, I think he was down where Gilbert Drugs is now.
Okay.
He was right in there.
Got it.
But Boley was always the family doctor, and
Oh, yeah.
so it was. Life was good.
Oh, yeah, for sure. This episode of The Havery Show is being brought to you by Heartland Tax and Accounting, 863-385-5020. I'm sure that you've already considered this, and everything else. But do you think that there's any way that the phosphate allergy, was there any contribution to Mike's leukemia? Do you think there was any connection at all?
No. His leukemia when he was 16 was really kind of strange because there were 4 people in Sebring who had it at the same time.
Yes.
Carlos Falla's daughter, she was older than Mike, but she had finished her treatment by the time Mike got it. John Fisher's daughter,
Kristen.
who was about Mike's age,
Yeah.
she had it, and then there was a retired Methodist minister. He was actually a missionary, and he had retired to Sebring, and he had it. We found out by taking Mike to the Watson Clinic in Lakeland because he was just losing weight. He was, I don't remember if it was swimming season or no, it couldn't have been swimming season. It must have been wrestling or something. But he was losing weight too fast, and they caught it. And we went to Shands in Gainesville, and he was treated for 2 months, and then came home for 2 weeks and went back and was treated for 2 months and never had it again. And he was the only one that lived. The other 3 died. So.
Scary time. Can't imagine.
Oh, you spend a lot of time on your knees.
Yeah, for sure.
But when we got there, got in the room, and they were explaining the 3 types of treatments that were going on right then. And one of the good things is they interplayed with a bunch of other cancer centers, and they posted information on every patient online so everybody could see what was being treated and how it was working and all that kind of stuff. And there were 3 primary ways of treating it back then. There was one that had better results, but the treatment was harsher. One that treatment wasn't as harsh, but they didn't have quite as good results. And then one that treatment was very light, and the results were not good. And so we told Mike, said, "You got to choose, son. You pick the one." He said, "I'm going to take the hardest one, thank you." And so that's what he did. The others, Carlos Falla's daughter, chose the same thing, and then she did not die from leukemia. She had some problem with some bone, something that as a result of the radiation.
No kidding.
Yeah, but the other 2 did not live 3 or 4 months. They wouldn't treat the retired missionary. They didn't want to give him the harder stuff because they didn't think he'd survive it. What they do is kill all the white blood cells. And then you're in a room that's called a laminar flow, and one wall behind the bed, hospital bed, it has little tiny holes in it. And all the air comes out of those little tiny holes and comes across the patient and goes out the other wall. So no germs or anything can get close to them from people who come in. So it worked. It worked on Mike. Did a good job. And as a result of that treatment, back then they didn't know what hepatitis C was. They called it non-A, non-B. And you can get hepatitis C from blood transfusions.
Oh, wow.
Back then, because they didn't know how to find it, apparently. Well, he ended up getting it. And they told him that he would live till about age 52, and that he would not have children. And so he has 2 children. He's now 57 or 58. And then the reason, not the reason for the children, but the reason for still being alive and not having Hep C was when he was about 52 or 51, they were doing a study up there on a new Hep C treatment. And he heard about it, and he was in Virginia at the time, and so he went to the place and said, "Put me in, please." And they said, "Oh, we're already full, but okay, we'll put you in." So they put him in, and he got the real thing rather than the placebo. And after the very first treatment, he was cured. They couldn't find it. Wow. And they said, look, you still have to take the rest of the treatments. And he said, no problem. Bring it on. Mm-hmm. And
what a story.
Hep C went away, and that's when they found something good for treating it.
Wow. Remarkable, really.
Had to be in the right place at the right time.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. That's the story of life, isn't it?
Sure is.
You've got a pretty rich history out at the racetrack.
I'm old anyway.
Tell me some stuff about the racetrack and your involvement out there, the different groups you've been a part of over the years, the people you've met.
Ooh. I first came to the first free Sebring race I came to was in 1966. I just moved to Bartow. My 15-year-old brother was living with us. I decided I'd heard about the Sebring race. I decided I'd take him to the Sebring race. And we had a Volkswagen.
Yeah.
And we took a little pup tent-like thing we had, and we put it in there, and we took some foodstuffs, and we came to the race.
Yeah.
And I didn't know anything about anything. And I ended up over in the Green Park.
Oh, boy.
Oh, dear heart. Yes.
The zoo.
Yes. And by nightfall, I told him we were not setting up the tent. We saw, back then they had motorcycles. Yep. They allowed them in. And so there were some motorcycles running around, running over tents. People in them, people not in them, didn't care. So anyway, the bottom line is, when we left the next morning, I said, we're going to sleep in the car. So we did. And so next morning when we left, I swore that I was not coming back to Sebring until I could come in a little better situation than that.
So it was out of control even back then. Uh-huh. Yeah. I thought the heyday was maybe the 80s, but maybe not. Yeah, maybe 60s, 70s.
We didn't see any nudity.
Gotcha.
There was considerable amount of drinking, apparently. There was an Oldsmobile station wagon right down the way from us that had a big bonfire behind it, and the kids in it had backed it up close so they could run across the top of the car and try to jump the fire. Now the fire that's a gas tank back there, and the fire is licking up the back end of this car. And finally, some guy went over there and told them move it, and they did. But it was different. But after I got here, I got involved. Ford Haycock was ultimately doing some stuff out there with bringing in some vintage cars, and the deal was that you could sponsor a vintage car for $100 and get your name on the side of the car, nice. And they had a little support race for the 12-hour. Mm-hmm. And so we got to know some of the vintage drivers then, guys from different places. My son Will, who's a financial advisor and was a police detective before he got married and got a kid on the way, and was convinced to avoid that. He, at that time in his life, he was about 4 or 5 years old, and he wanted to be a doctor. Yep. And there was a doctor in the crowd in the vintage cars. He and his wife had a vintage car, and he had one. And we found out later, you probably never saw it because it happened so long ago, there was a Budweiser commercial, it was a Miller beer commercial on television when they first came in with the screw-off tops. Yep. And there's a little blonde gal, pretty little blonde gal, who there's a big muscular guy who was couldn't get it open, and he hands it to the little blonde gal, and she opens the top. His wife was a little blonde girl.
No kidding. And
her favorite charity got paid like $50,000 for her to do that for.
Wow.
So she was that. But he was a pediatric brain surgeon in Columbus, Ohio. And I remember he found out Will was interested in being a doctor, and Mary's cousins were doctors, and they sent stuff to him all the time. And so I remember him walking off with his arm around Will's shoulder saying, son, and Will wanted to be a heart surgeon. Mm-hmm. He says, son, you got to get out of hearts and get into brains. That's where the action is. I'm sitting there going, oh.
Oh, wow. So what deterred him from going down the medical path?
Don't know. Yeah, that's a question you have to ask him.
Okay.
He was a junior in in college, and I at home in the middle of the year, and I said, "Have you signed up to take the I can't remember the name of the test for the med school, but whatever it was, you signed up to do that?" And he said, "No, I don't think I want to be a doctor." I said, "What do you want to do?" And he said, "I want to be a police officer."
What a switch.
I said, "Well, when you're 4 and 5 years old, you want to be a police officer. When you're 21 years old, you want to be a doctor. You got it a little backwards." He said, "I know, but that's what I really want to do." So when he graduated from undergraduate school at Florida State, he went to police academy up in St. Mary's, I think, and became a police officer and was hired by the Gainesville Police Department. And he was undercover narcotics and SWAT team, and did well up there. And I remember him coming down after Mike started working at the racetrack. Him coming down, and he was standing in a crowd of their friends, and he was in his grubbies, and Mary and I were standing there listening to him. And Mike was talking, and Mike was working there then, but he'd come over to visit, and he was talking, and they were talking about things. And one of Will's best friends said, "You know what really would have made this great?" And Mike said, "What?" He said, "If Will could have been here." And Will standing there in the crowd. Mary looked at me. She says, "I think you'll be okay." Yeah, if your best friend doesn't even recognize you.
Yeah.
But anyway, the bottom line is he was down here visiting on Thanksgiving, and we had a brand new police chief. And somehow he meets the police chief somewhere, and the police chief finds out what he's doing and this and that and the other. Is offered him a job as a detective if he had moved back to Sebring. So he came back to Sebring.
I'll be darned.
Yeah.
How about that?
Yep.
That's fantastic. This episode of The Havery Show is being brought to you by Heartland Tax and Accounting, 863-385-5020. Tell me about one of my favorite people in all the world, hands down. Tell me about Miss Mary and how you met.
Oh.
The love story of the century.
Oh. It's another example of how God works things. Mary was all everything in high school in Bartow. And she came to Florida State the same time I did. We were the same age. She was a Chi Omega, and I was an ATO. I did not know her. I later found out a lot about her, but I didn't know her then. And we were both juniors and starting our junior year. And I was a psychology major, and she was a Spanish, Portuguese, liberal arts, Spanish and Portuguese major, or Spanish really. And I go in, a friend of mine who had been in an experimental psych class with me and I were taking the same course called dynamic psychiatry. And so we show up early so we can get a good seat up front. And so we're the only two people in the room, sitting there in a pretty big classroom, and right in the dead set middle in front of the professor's desk. And Mary walks in and comes over to me and looks at the seat beside me. He says, "Is this seat taken?" No, it's not. And so she sat down, and fortunately, and I asked her, I said, "Are you majoring in psychology?" She said, "No, I'm a Spanish major." I said, "Well, why are you taking a junior level course in psychiatry?" She said, "Because it sounded like it'd be fun."
Wow.
And so the bottom line is I was able to assist her quite a bit during that semester. We started dated. We almost did not have a second date because when we doubled with a friend of mine who's also now a lawyer, and we double dated, and we were going, I think, bowling or something, and his brother was an attorney in the governor's office up there, and a friend of his and his wife were having a party that night in their mobile home. and so his brother invited him and me, and so we went to that. Now, the problem with that at Florida State at that time is women could not go to off-campus parties in private homes without special permission.
Okay.
And Mary's roommate was the head of women's judiciary for the college. So Mary is in borderline hysteria because we're going to a party off campus, and she didn't have permission to go. And we walk in, and who is throwing the party but one of her good friends from Lake Wales, who's married to Bobby Stokes, who's a new lawyer, Patsy. And so all of a sudden everything's okay. You know, it's one of her family's good friends. So God stepped in and kind of pulled my chestnuts out of that fire. But Mary's the reason I went to law school.
Well, I was going to ask, because you said you started off as a psychology major.
I was going to be a professor.
Where was the shift?
After Mary and I got to seriously dating, we got pinned in the middle of our junior year. Well, at the end of our middle of our junior year, because we first met in the middle, but at the end of that we got pinned, which is like engaged to be engaged. Mm-hmm. And so she said, "Well, what are you going to do?" You know, I said, "I'm going to be a college professor." She said, "No, you need to be a lawyer." I said, "Why would I need to be a lawyer?" Because you do. You need to be a lawyer. And I found out her grandfather was a lawyer, her uncle was a lawyer. And so I just said, no. I said, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll take the SAT for graduate school and the LSAT for law school, and whichever one I do better in, that's where I'll go. And she said, okay. I took both, and I can't remember which one had the higher possible points, but one of them's points was twice as much as the maximum points on the other. So I said, we'll just double the LSAT, the law school one, was half the points of the GRE, graduate work record exam. So I said, we'll double whatever I get on the LSAT, and we'll compare it to the score I get on the GRE. They were exactly the same.
Oh, no.
And so she said, I told you should go to law school. But then I was working. I was taking some courses with some graduate students, and who were also teachers' aides and stuff. And I started learning about a thing called publish or perish, which means if you wanted to keep your job on staff at a college, you had to publish articles that got good reviews in order to keep your job. And also there was infighting among the graduate students and the up-and-coming professors about who was going to get moved forward. And I finally decided, if I'm going to fight, I might as well get paid for it.
Yeah, that's right.
So I went to law school.
Fantastic. You spent a number of years as the city attorney for the city of Sebring.
That's true.
How many years was that?
Maybe 30.
30 years.
I'm guessing.
So you've seen some city councilmen and mayors come and go. Not so much with mayors, because we had
hold
Shoup
mayors
for a while, and we had Mayor Hensley for a pretty good spell before that.
Yes, we did.
So most of your tenure then would have been under George, I suppose, or not under, but with.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you turned it over to Bob.
Well, no, they turned it over to Bob.
So he became highly recommended by the city attorney.
Well, I didn't object.
Well, he's doing a great job. I've been to a lot of those meetings.
Good.
I never had the pleasure to see you in action at one of those things because I didn't go to many meetings. The last one I went to before Harrison got elected was back during the whole Sebring Utilities Commission debacle.
That was an interesting time.
It sure was.
Bob now lives in my first house. He moved in there, but he's fixed it up a lot. Back then, my utility bill would run $600 and $700 a month. My utility bill in my current house, which is a bit larger, is like $118, $119 a month.
Yeah, there was that little special thing called the Sebring rider, as I recall.
Yes.
I remember there was a big hubbub about that whole deal, and there was a big meeting there at City Hall, and there were too many people, and as I recall, they moved us down the street to a different place. I can't remember where the place was, but I was walking with Garland Bogus and his wife, and I made a comment about how exciting all of this is, and he said, "Well, I suppose it depends on which side of the aisle you're on," and that stuck with me since then.
Yep.
To remind myself to keep my mouth shut, because you really don't know, just because you have an opinion doesn't mean the people around you share that opinion. So better to just be quiet and pay attention.
Yeah, well, it's a good thing to learn.
It is.
Easier way than the hard way.
That's right.
When you voice your opinion and the brickbats come out.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. He was very gracious with that lesson.
Yeah.
He taught me. I don't even think that he realized he taught me a lesson in that moment, but
well,
he did.
he probably agreed with you, but when you're an employee of the city and all this is going on, then it's kind of traumatic.
Yeah.
It was very interesting.
Do you remember him from his theater days?
No,
Oh yeah, he was the ticket taker at Southgate.
I did
Oh yeah. He would be there, and he would he'd have his,
the vest on and all that
no,
stuff.
maybe a bow tie possibly, but
Yeah.
he was the ticket taker, and just a really neat guy.
Yeah,
And it's funny,
like him.
Yeah, and to see his son, kind of following in the footsteps, and to see really there's the resemblance, of course, and everything, but yeah, what a neat guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The city has been blessed with really good employees.
Oh, they have.
For the major extent. Kathy Haley's now going to retire.
Yes.
I believe they're going to convert her position to an employee, like they did with the police chief, instead of an elected official.
Well, now they had that referendum,
Mm-hmm.
and to my knowledge, that got
passed.
shot. It did pass.
I think it passed.
I thought it had got shot down. Okay.
Oh, wow.
I'll have to call my city councilman to find out how
Find
that.
out, because I think there were 100 and something votes.
Yeah, it was a ridiculously low turnout.
Yeah, but I just assumed it passed because it made so much sense.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
This episode of The Havery Show is being brought to you by Heartland Tax and Accounting, 863-385-5020. Well, what do you think about all the HGTV stuff going on?
I think it's a mixed blessing.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah, it's. I have to admit to being absolutely stunned to see the number of people coming downtown. I did not expect that.
It's remarkable.
I thought it was a nice thing. The only thing that bothers me a little bit about the show is they have a hard time praising what had been done.
Thank you.
And because if they had come in 3 or 4 years before, it would have been much worse.
That's right.
And the downtown redevelopment is doing a really good job of bringing it along. But I understand that doesn't sell on TV.
Yeah, that's right.
And I'm tickled to death they did it. I'm sorry that Avon Park seems to have gotten so upset about them doing it at Sebring and not in Avon Park.
Well, they could have applied.
Lake Placid are treating it very well. They're happy, and they're getting the overflow.
Yeah, that's right.
I've had some friends of mine that show up in town and call me up. From Boca Raton.
Mm-hmm.
They came up for the weekend.
Yeah.
I said, "What? Excuse me?" Yeah. Said, "Well, we want to see all this stuff and all this." But I am finding out that it's a mixed blessing for those whose homes were redone, because apparently people show up and expect to be able to be shown through the house.
Amazing, isn't it?
It is.
The entitlement that people think because they saw something on TV that they should be allowed to go into a personal private home. It's unreal.
I'm shocked.
Yeah. Yeah, shocked, and yet nothing really shocks me anymore when it comes to people.
Well, these friends came from Boca Raton, and they said, we want to get with you. I said, okay, well, you want to go out to dinner Friday? No, we can't. We got to go so-and-so. And so we talked every day for the weekend, twice in the morning. They call in the morning, call in the afternoon. And finally ended up having a late breakfast on Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
And but they would call and tell me where they'd been and what they'd seen and what they did and and they were just so excited.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Hey, if we have excited visitors coming, that's a good thing. But on the other side of it, I called Will last week and said, you want to grab lunch? And he said, yeah. And I said, where? He said, anywhere but downtown.
Well, yeah. And this couple, they wanted to go to Sophie's.
Yep.
And they said that the line was out and down the street.
Absolutely.
I said, well, hopefully Dee's and some of them are getting the overflow.
Yep, that's right. And Dee's is always going to have Dee's customers.
Yep.
And they're as faithful as the day is long. And she's never going to lose her faithful customers. So if she gets some overflow from some of the other places and then they get hooked on her service and food and, the whole D experience, that's only a good thing.
Yep.
And
she just does breakfast and lunch.
That's right. And there's plenty of people down there.
Yeah.
They've done a great job, man. Dee and Stacy and the crew, they've done a wonderful job. You talk about icons in the community. There's a couple of them right there, and their whole staff. Mm-hmm. What great people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's also good for 27 because if some of the locals know what's going on downtown and they know that during this season, and it's a season, that's all. During this season, there's a bunch of people downtown, so let's head out to the highway. It's good for the businesses on the highway, too. Everybody wins.
Everybody.
Yeah, that's Harrison's big thing. It's his, he wants to be in situations where everybody wins.
You betcha.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like it a lot. Have you been to Watkins Glen?
Oh, yeah.
Track? You've been there several times, yeah?
Oh, 20, 30.
20, 30 times.
Yeah. We ran a race, SVRA ran a race there on the first weekend in September every year. It still does.
Yeah. So what did you think of the little? You probably didn't get to town very much, did you? You were at the race
a little
track
bit.
most of the time.
We in the early days we would do a kind of like a downtown. The original race ran through downtown.
Yes.
And so when we did our first races up there, out at the track, the Corning Glass and somebody else built the track.
Mm-hmm.
But when we did the first races there, we took race cars and went downtown and followed the old race just to let everybody see it and that kind of stuff. So you got some stuff downtown there. But downtown is very quaint.
It is.
We used to stay at the trying to remember the name of the inn, but it's up at the top of the glen.
Seneca Lodge.
Seneca Lodge. We always stayed at the Seneca Lodge.
Yeah.
And it was fun, and I really enjoyed it's New York wine country.
Yes.
And going around and seeing the different places. And there's one crazy winery up there. I don't remember the name of the wine, but it's a guy that used to own Taylor State.
Uh-huh.
And his family had sold it. And it was right in the middle of a big fight because he opened up another winery that was in his name. Don't remember his first name, but it had his first and last name,
Sure.
Taylor. And so Taylor State sued him because they had bought the right to the name of wine of Taylor. And so we went to his winery to do a tasting just because it sounded interesting.
Oh yeah.
And the person who did he had wines were named like Love My Goat Red. And I said, that's got to be a story to that. So I asked the lady who's doing the tasting, I said, there's a story behind this, right? And she said yes. And she told us the story. Taylor State had sued him, the owner of the winery, because he couldn't use the name Taylor. And so the judge had told him that he had to deliver everything with the name Taylor on it, all the labels, all of the letterhead, all the everything. He had to deliver it to Taylor State Winery. And so he said, well, where do I take it? The judge said, I don't care where you take it, deliver it to, this is their address of their winery, deliver it to them. So he took all the stuff and he put it in a used fertilizer spreader, a manure spreader. And he went up there and he spread it on their front lawn.
No.
And the TV cameras were there, and they were filming all of this. And then he pulls up in a little thing, pulling a little horse cart like a horse carrier, and he brings this goat on a leash, and he goes over here and he goes to the Taylor State guy and he says, "Okay, that goat's name is Taylor. Do you want it too?" And the guy said, "No, we don't want that goat." So his motto was, "They got my name, but they never got my goat."
Oh, that's outstanding. Oh, wow. That's great. I'm going to have to talk to my friend Gilly about that because he'll know exactly.
He'll know
He'll know that whole story.
He'll know exactly where it is. I don't know if the winery's still there or not. The guy had met a girl on an airplane flight. The owner had met some gal, and she had given him her telephone number and address, and he wrote it on a piece of paper. And he got home, and he had lost it. And so this guy's also an artist. So he paints a picture as he remembers this woman. They make it into a label.
No.
And puts it on wine that's being shipped all over New York State. And he puts it on the wine with a thing. It says, "Call me," and has his phone number.
Did it work?
No.
Oh, that would have been the best story.
It didn't. It had not by that time, but they were still putting the bottles.
Okay. Oh, that's a great story there. Holy moly. Did Mary go with you to the Watkins Glen trips, or was that like a guy thing, a business thing?
In the first years, she didn't because the kids were in school.
Mm-hmm.
Although she started doing it when her mom could come down and take care of them.
Mm-hmm.
And then she started going. She would work in timing and scoring. I was grid chief, and so she'd come down. Yeah, so the Seneca Lodge was always nice to us.
That's a cool place.
It is.
It's like stepping back in time.
Oh.
And they've added some new cabins and stuff, but and of course the bar with all the arrows in it.
Arrows shot into the wall.
What a remarkable place.
If you got a deer, you're allowed to shoot an arrow into the wall, that log wall behind the bar.
Got to be thousands of arrows.
There are.
It's just
There's all kind of
ridiculous.
arrows.
Yeah. And like you said, it's right at the very top of the gorge.
Right.
And you can get on the state park just with a few steps.
We used to go down. We used to, when we first got there, before we'd get there on Wednesday night, Thursday night, because we'd unload cars Friday morning at the track. And we'd get there Thursday night, and we'd walk over and go down those spiral staircase down into the gorge and walk down, look out over the city, and then walk back up.
Yeah,
go have dinner.
Place. Really cool place.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice. This episode of The Havery Show is being brought to you by Heartland Tax and Accounting, 863-385-5020. Your wife, Mary, was in the circus.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about the circus? Because
I don't know anything about the circus. I didn't know she was in the circus until I found a circus jacket. And she was in the circus as a freshman and a sophomore.
Gotcha.
And I found later, after we were married, just happened to be going through the closet looking for something of mine, and I find a circus jacket.
Yeah.
Florida State circus jacket. And I said, "Why is this here?" She said, "I was in the circus." What? And she had two things. And one, I think it was called a Mexican web. And one was a flying something. You climbed up a rope and hooked a foot in a thing, and some guy stands down here and spins it. But yeah,
I would have never guessed that. I didn't know about it until I guess it was the memorial service, and it got brought up. And I'm just that whole service. I'm just scratching my head, thinking to myself, what kind of human is this? Who does all this stuff? Just remarkable. She was I've mentioned this to Will, but she was the perfect blend of a real lady and badassery. I mean, she just had it. You knew what you were dealing with her. There was no, I wonder.
Yeah.
It was on the table. You knew where she stood. You knew what she expected.
Exactly.
And yet, she was so graceful and kind and loving.
Oh yeah.
What a remarkable lady.
She was raised. Her mother was the same way, and so she was raised that way. She Bartow was a wonderful place apparently to raise kids, like Sebring is,
Yeah.
and so yeah, she had the state grand champion bull at Tampa,
Yeah.
her senior year, and she went to the movies in Tallahassee as a freshman. She went down to the movies shortly after she got there with some of her girlfriends. And in the old days, in the movies, they had a local Florida news script thing they put on before
right.
they showed the main show. And it goes on, and here is a thing with her bull being loaded onto an airplane and flown to Brazil. It had been purchased by a Brazilian ranch. And there's her father standing there putting the bull on the
Wow.
plane to be flown to Brazil. They flew the animal down there rather than shipping it down because it was the grand champion. And I asked her when I found out about it, I said, well, did you stay and watch the movie? She said, no, I had left immediately, went back to the sorority house and called my father and said, you sold. And he said, Mary, what did you think we were going to do, keep him as a pet?
That's great.
And she said, no, but I thought you at least told me. And he said, well, I was going to when the time was right.
Wow.
Yeah, but she was special.
Yeah, really was.
Yeah, I was blessed when people ask you, how you got things. She raised two teenagers when we had been married a year and a half. We were married. We went off to I was going to law school. She was getting her master's degree. And halfway through, my mother dies, and she was single mother. Mm-hmm. And so we inherited a 17-year-old and a 15-year-old. And so she helped raise my two brothers.
I'll be darned.
Yeah.
Yeah, I vaguely remember that from the memorial, too.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. And how old was she at that point? Early 20s? 22, and raising two
22,
teenagers.
23, maybe.
How did your brothers, she commanded respect. Just her presence commanded respect.
The youngest one got a job delivering newspapers.
Mm-hmm.
And so she would get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, drive him down to load the newspapers, and then drive him around so he could throw them out.
Yeah.
And,
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. She, my next youngest, I'm the oldest, next youngest brother, Bob, he said, yeah, Mary saved us. You and Mary, but Mary really.
Wow.
So, because they had not expected Mom to pass away.
Fantastic.
She was a heavy smoker,
Mm-hmm.
but she had lung cancer.
Mm-hmm.
But Mary just jumped right in there, and away we went.
Yep. That sounds like probably the whole story of your life. Jump right in there and away we go.
Away you go.
Whatever it is.
Yes, you do.
Tell me about your grandkids. How many grandkids?
9.
9 grandkids.
9 grandkids. Will has 4 girls. Mike has a boy and a girl, and Bob has 2 boys and 1 girl.
Yeah.
And they're all great.
What a great legacy.
No, yeah, they're fantastic. They're all the ones who are of age to have done so have already graduated from college,
Mm-hmm.
and all but one of them has gotten a master's.
Mm-hmm.
Madeline is Luke plays football for the University of New Hampshire.
Wow.
And in his second year up there, and Madeline is a junior at Florida State
Mm-hmm.
and plans to go to law school.
Mm-hmm.
She has been going to law functions since she was in utero, because the whole time that she's been around, Bob and I have been involved in state bar things with the probate, the real property probate and trust law section of the Florida Bar. I was chair 22 or 23 years ago, and Bob was chair 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah.
But so she's always been there.
Yeah.
And I had to caution her to be careful when she's doing things, because she, as between her freshman and sophomore year, she was invited to attend a function, a study at Florida State Law School.
Mm-hmm.
And they gave her, it didn't cost anything to do. It was like a 6-week program. And it didn't cost anything to do. She got credit for it. And the 30 kids did it. And they got credit for it. They got an apartment to live in, and they got $300 for food money.
What a deal.
Hard to get by. And so the very first day, they had them sign in. They had name tags, big name tags on, and they're in the room at the Florida Bar building where they do use for large group gatherings and kind of have elevator seating on it.
Mm-hmm.
And she's sitting right up dead center up front, which I had told her that's the best place to do that. You might meet somebody. But the fellow gets up front, and on the back wall behind him is pictures of prominent people in the bar, Florida Bar.
Mm-hmm.
Photograph, portraits or something. And so the guy, he can see their name tags, and Madeline's sitting there. He says, Madeline. No, he says, first I want to know how many of y'all know a lawyer, 1 or 2 lawyers. And he said, how about, and so 3 or 4 of them raised their hand, including Madeline. He says, Madeline, tell us who you know. She said, well, sir, if you turn around and look at the wall behind you, I know. And she starts naming lawyers.
Wow.
And judges.
Holy moly.
Because she knew them from going to these meetings.
Yeah.
And the guy's kind of apparently he's a little shell-shocked. And he said, well, no. Anybody in your family a lawyer? She says, well, my dad's a lawyer, my grandfather's a lawyer, my great-great-grandfather on my mother's side was a lawyer.
Wow.
And she said, the guy said, okay, you know lawyers, and you got family lawyers. Now, anybody else want to add anything? They went, no.
Nope.
I said, Madeline, honey, be careful. I said, who was that guy? She said, I have no idea.
Wow. She
I
made an impression.
Maybe you need to find out who he is. And she, at the time, she was babysitting for the grandchild of the Chief Justice, because she knew the Chief Justice's daughter, and the daughter had asked her if she'd babysit. And so,
Wow.
so she knows lawyers.
What a story.
Yeah.
This episode of The Havery Show is being brought to you by Heartland Tax and Accounting, 863-385-5020. I owe you a big thank you for a lot of things, but one thing I want to thank you for is you gave my kids all their first starts in their jobs. Katie.
Well, that's true. I forgot about that.
She worked for you in your office.
Yes.
For a long time.
Jim Dandy, yes.
Yeah, and she loved it.
Oh, yeah.
She loved working for you.
Yeah.
And then Rodney had his first lawn job taking care of your place.
I'd forgotten that.
Yeah, you offered him that, and he took it, and he did that for a while.
Yeah.
And as you know now, lawn service is one of the services that he offers. Mm-hmm. And so he got his start in his business because of you. Harrison took the lawn business from Rodney when Rodney was done with it. Mm-hmm. And because Harrison enjoyed it so much, Rodney and Harrison opened their first business together, a lawn company. Harrison figured out within the first year or so that really wasn't for him, and Rodney took it, and it became his first business. And he transferred that to Oregon. And before he had done that, he took that lawn business that started with you and turned that into house. When there's a foreclosure house, he had a clean-outs. So all of that traced back to his first job with you.
Our family has been close forever. And you were in New York when Mary passed away, and weren't going to be able to get back. And Mary wanted you to do her music.
That's right.
And you showed up anyway.
Yeah.
And
it all worked out.
I know that wasn't easy to arrange, but it was. I mean, my family was so excited you were able to get back.
It was a real, true honor to be asked to participate in that.
Well, that was her request, and we all agreed.
She when I made the decision to step away from Bible fellowship, there were all these rumors going all around. You know,
Yes, they always are.
you know how it is.
Yeah.
And bottom line is, I just needed to change. You know, and I was walking from the church through the foyer to the old sanctuary, and she was sitting in there on the bench, as she often did. But I walked through and I said, "How you doing?" She said, "I'm doing real good." And she said, "How about you?" And she said, "I just want you to know something." She said, and she whispered it, even though there's nobody in there but me and her. And she said, "I don't know what's going on, but if you decide to start your own church, we'll go." I said, "No, ma'am. No, ma'am. I am not planning on, nor do I have any intention ever of starting a church.
Ever,
no, ma'am."
Never.
But that spoke volumes to me too.
Yeah.
She's always been so supportive
Yep.
of my family and me, and you too. Your whole family is just really outstanding and wonderful.
We've been close.
Yeah.
I mean, you were in school with Mike, weren't
Sure. Yeah, he went with me to. My mom said, "I'll take you to Disney World for your 12th birthday." I think it was 11th or 12th, and she said, "You can take anybody you want." So it was Mike. So yeah, we spent the 12th birthday trying to scam girls to get them to ride on rides with us, and we were standing in line at Space Mountain, and there were these two girls, and there was us, and we would pass each other. You know how the lines
Yeah.
do, kind of. Neither one of us wanted to say anything, but we wanted them to ride on Space Mountain, you know, because you were two in a car. So we thought it would be fun if we were, behind there, nearly on our laps.
Almost.
You just can't beat that.
Yeah.
But we didn't know what to do, and I think we were 12, I give or take. But Mike's, I'm gonna say something. So we finally, our paths met again, and he says, he's 12. He says, like a 35 or 40-year-old man. He says, "Pardon me, but would you ladies care to join us?" They just looked at each other and laughed and laughed and laughed. And we were shut down.
Yeah.
It's the stuff you remember.
Shot on the ground.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've always loved your family.
Yeah.
Your guys are outstanding. Will is one of my closest friends and advisors, and Bob, I played tennis with him and did some of that stuff with him. What a good guy. And Mike, I mean, my goodness, I've known Mike since I was in middle school.
Yeah. They're all doing well.
Yeah, they are. I know you're proud of them.
Yeah. Well, Mike, he quit. He was running Road Atlanta. He was president and CEO of Road Atlanta for 8 or 9, 10 years, whatever it was, and called me up and said, "Dad, I think God's got a different plan for me."
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "Okay, what you going to do now?" And he said, "I'm going to be a Christian counselor." I said, "Okay." I said, "You have to go back to school for that?" And he's got an undergraduate degree in chemistry and a master's in oceanography. And he said, "Yeah, I need to get another master's degree." So, "Where are you going?" He said, "Liberty University in Virginia." I said, "Okay, let's go." And so he went up and got that, and that's what he does now.
Yeah.
He specializes in mostly in veterans.
Mm-hmm.
He has a good rapport with them.
Yeah, for sure.
But, if you do what God tells you to do, things usually work out.
Amen.
Not always.
Not always.
Because it's His way, not yours.
That's right. Yeah. Hey, you know what? That is a really good statement to end on.
Okay.
Thank you for being here. I really, really appreciate it.
I'm glad to talk to you, always.
Yes, sir. I love you, man.
Love you too.
We're out.
Okay.
Just like that. And an hour has flown by.
Yeah. Time flies when you're having fun.
Yeah, it does. Wow. Oh, wow.
Good old days.
The good old days. I really like how you mentioned some of the names that I haven't heard in a long, long time. And honestly, that I had forgotten a lot of those names.
Yeah, all those people that we were on the boat together.
Yeah. Yeah, Sanford.
Oh, well, Rollerson, you probably don't remember, but he was sheriff for a very short period.
Yeah. Was he before Joe Shepard?
Oh, yeah. and he was right before Joe.
Yeah.
And he refused to campaign. He said, and I said, well, you're going to get whipped. This former highway patrolman is going around telling all kinds of things that are not true, and you need to get some signs up. And he said, Mike, if they like the way job I've done, they'll vote me back in. If they don't, they won't. I said, that is not the way politics works, Bubba. You need to get out and start doing some stuff. Mm-hmm. Well, anyway, he lost, and Joe Shepard won. But it worked out for the best, probably. He ended up going to FDLE and then going over to Okeechobee. Mm-hmm. And he was the sheriff there until he retired.
Yeah. And
he was originally from Okeechobee.
Mm-hmm.
But he was an absolute pistol. We were on that boat taking that Calusa chief down to there, and we were in LaBelle, and the guys were kind of noisy, and some of them in the back room there shooting craps. And I don't know if you've ever been down or noticed it, if you go across the bridge that going into LaBelle off of 80 or whatever mm-hmm. that road is, there's the boat docks are kind of right here on the city side, okay. And they've got the railroad ties built up for steps along the whole thing. Mm-hmm. And at the top up there, this deputy sheriff pulls up, and I'm out front, and I think I was up on top, and I yelled downstairs. I said, "Watch it, guys! There's a deputy sheriff up here. Y'all got to need to calm down." And Oel said, "I'll handle it." And he had on a cowboy shirt, unbuttoned, blue jeans, no shoes. He jumps off the boat, walks up the thing to the deputy, talks to the deputy, and I say, "The boy's going to jail." And the deputy goes and gets back in the car and gets on the radio and comes back. OL walks back down to the boat, and I'm just trying to figure out where to hide. And the deputy comes out of the car and stands up there and says, "Sheriff so-and-so of whatever this county is proud to welcome Sheriff Rollerson and his friends from Highlands County, and I've been instructed to stay here all night long and make sure no one bothers you."
Wow.
And I'm sitting there going, wow. And then he said, "Is anything I can do to help you, gentlemen?" And somebody said, "We could use some more ice." And the deputy said, "Okay." He says, "You got something to put it in?" And they said, "Yeah." And he said, "Okay." And we give him ice chest, and he goes to the jail and fills it up with ice and brings it back for us. I'm sitting there going, this is very interesting.
That's great.
You think you're going to jail, and you're getting some ice.
Wow. You never know.
You never know. But yeah, it was. And his I can't remember how the guy put it, but it was very flowery. Mm-hmm. The Honorable O.L. Rollerson, Sheriff of Highlands County, and his friends.
Oh, man.
Yeah, that was a very interesting time.
I guess it was. This episode of The Havery Show is being brought to you by Heartland Tax and Accounting, 863-385-5020.
Gus's brother-in-law, Gus's wife's family owned the big building and supply house in Fort Lauderdale. Mm-hmm. And his brother-in-law had worked down there, his wife's brother. And he was very meticulous. And rumor had it, they had moved him up to Highlands County because he was going to make them go broke down there trying to be so meticulous on building trusses, making sure they were exactly right and driving people crazy. So he ends up here. And so they put him in charge of building the pontoons.
Got it.
And like I said, they were 40 feet long, and they were 4 feet by 4 feet, and they were made out of big 2x4s and marine plywood, mm-hmm. and then fiberglass. Mm-hmm. And they had they had 22. There were 22 2x8s that went across between the two, held the two
Got it.
together.
Yeah.
And they had 2x8s that came out of he had 2x8s that came up out of the hull, and those crossrooms were bolted to them, and that's what. And then the deck was laid on top of that, and the structure was built on top of that. I'm looking at that boat, and the holes are already drilled in the two on each. There were two that came up out of each place on the hull, and there were 22 of them. They came every 2 feet.
Yep.
And I'm thinking, we're gonna have to re-drill those, to make them fit, and we take the big 20-foot pieces to go across the baits are already drilled. When we went to put it together, he had them numbered. When we went to put it together, they fit.
Wow.
The bolts went through it. You just went, they think, 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 think. I said, what? His name was Dub. Our nickname was Dub, D-U-B. And so he was, but it's hard to get somebody who can do something like that.
Yeah, that's a fact.
And then they had, my father-in-law and Gus had a big argument. We'd gotten the hulls had been affixed to the decking and we're getting ready to start building the structure. And my father-in-law wanted us to put it in the water and then build a top. And Gus wanted to build it on land and put the whole thing in the water. And they had, it was sitting on fence post, sideways, laid, so you could roll it down the bank to get to the water. And finally Gus said, Richard, why are you insisting on doing it this way? He said, well, I've calculated. He said, you've been weighing all the materials, and there's X number of pounds, right? And he said, yes. And he said, well, I would kind of rather lose half of it at one time than all of it at once. Let's roll this thing and see if it floats. And Gus said, no, we're not doing that. And he went over and put a mark on the side of the pontoon, and he said, if that water comes up higher than that mark on this pontoon, and they had some kind of a bet going, you win. And we're putting it in, we're going to build the whole thing and then put it in the water.
And it worked.
It did. And it's still down there somewhere.
No kidding. All these
told
years.
It is.
That would be worth a trip with a grandkid or something,
If you
just
could
to go
find it.
down there and just so we're not leaving until we find it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been all around down there. And Gus, unfortunately, had Alzheimer's. But it was interesting. I went to Lenny's funeral. Gus was there with his new wife. I don't remember her name. And I was over talking to him, and we were talking about fishing in Chokoloskee. And he was talking right along. And then one of his daughters came up, my granddaughters came up and said, there's some people who want to talk to you, Dad. And so he walked off with her. And his wife was in tears. And I said, what's the matter? She said, he has never talked about anything like that to anybody. And I said, well, because it was so long ago. Alzheimer's seems to damage current memories more than it does past memories. And she said, that was just amazing. I've never heard those stories.
Wow.
But I guess I've triggered some memory that he still had or something. I didn't know it was that bad. That's when I knew. And then I found out because when he was talking to somebody out there, he knew pretty well he couldn't remember who it was. Yeah. Then when he got through, one of the girls asked him who he talked to. He couldn't remember.
Well, what a gift for that precious moment that she got to hear those stories and see him, pop to life. That's great.
Yeah.
Wow.
Fun stuff. Sebring was quite a time back then. It wasn't the Wild West, but it was something like one.
Well, I've heard stories. I've heard some interesting stories about the swinging 60s and everything that's entailed there. And yeah, it was you could definitely write some interesting books about Sebring.
Unless you had gone hunting down at the fireman's camp down in glades.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting stuff.
Oh, yeah. This episode of The Havery Show is being brought to you by Heartland Tax and Accounting, 863-385-5020.
But there's some interesting characters here in this town back then. There probably still are now. It's just
Yeah, but back then
hard to find.
some of the people were, Gracie McCoy.
Oh, good heavens, yes.
I mean, there's nobody has taken Gracie's place, and nobody ever will, for
Nobody
heaven's
could.
sake.
Nobody could. I remember Mary and I were invited by Elgin Bayless and his wife to go to a function down at the Holiday Inn. We'd been in town about a month. Go to some function at the Holiday Inn down in Lake Placid.
Mm-hmm.
We went down there, and Gracie McCoy was there, all in
yeah.
pink and
Oh,
stuff.
yeah.
And I said, Elton, who in the world is that? He said, that's Gracie McCoy. He said, go ask her to take her clothes off. She will. I said, I looked at her and I said, I don't think so. I don't think so, no. And her daughter, I think it was her daughter. She never said it was her daughter. It was named Snooky.
Mm-hmm.
Snooky Latham. And her sister's name was Dutch McCoy.
Yeah.
And I was hired to handle her estate. Tommy Wall was her PR.
Mm-hmm.
And they were interviewing 3 lawyers. I was the last one. I knew Jack Hancock was one. I don't know who the other one was. But they did it in the dining room of her little house down in the lake.
Mm-hmm.
And when I'm talking to Snooky and Dutch, this guy walks out of the room door over here, walks across on the other side of the table from me, and goes out that door. And he's wearing a white shirt, underwear, black socks, and shoes, and a tie. And he walks out and walks across. And so we're still talking, and we get talking, and we get through, and they said, well, we're going to hire you. He said, Mr. Wall said he'll be the PR, but we had to agree on he said any of these 3 would be fine, you 3, and we're going to hire you. And I said, can I ask you why? What made the difference? She said, you didn't flinch when they named him, walked across the room in the underwear. And I said, okay, everybody else flinched? He said, oh, Mr. Hancock threatened to beat him up for walking across in front of these ladies. And they started laughing. He called us ladies.
Oh, that's awesome.
So,
Oh, my.
and at her funeral, they started wheeling the casket out. It was painted pink.
Of course.
They start wheeling the casket out. And Dutch stands up, and she had a cane that she walked with, and took her cane and hit that railing. It was in the Presbyterian church. Hit that railing in front. Pow! And everybody stopped. And she says, "Where in the hell are you going with that?" And he said, "We have to take it to the." Tyrone was doing it. We have to take it and put it in a thing to take it to the. Okay, go ahead. Oh. I'm sitting there going, what have I gotten myself into?
What a character.
Yeah, but good thing Tommy was handling it, so it got handled right.
Yeah, that's right. Man,
Anyway,
man.
thank you you brought a lot of memories back I hadn't expected.
Thank you.
It's always fun
We
to
could do
reminisce.
10 more of these, and there would be different stories for everyone, and it would be cool.
Oh, all those people. It's just like, the guy that had the little golf course on the Parkway.
Yeah.
The guy that owned all of that. I can't.
I used to remember his name, and now I can't.
Anyway, he was a friend of Gus's, and they were talking about his daddy. His daddy was a wheeler dealer apparently, and Sherwood, Bob Sherwood, but his daddy. They talked about him about he'd gone over to London for something. He and a friend, and that friend's wife and his wife, and they'd gone over there, and so they had gone to this. The men had gone to this store that specialized in really good shoes, expensive but really good, and walked in, and the guy in the store said, "Good afternoon, gentlemen. What's your pleasure?" And Doc Sherwood said, "Whiskey and women, but we're here for shoes." But Bob missed the ramp. We went down to go doing something on the houseboat down while I was in Chokoloskee, and Bob missed the ramp trying to get on. We'd gone down on in a motorhome, and a bunch of us, and Gus had a driver for it, and he was driving it back. Yeah. And he missed it and go down into the water. We hauled him out. And Gus says, "Put him on the motorhome." And he told the guy, "Take him home." He just, whoop. And you're sitting there going, hey, the funny thing is when he did that, we all looked at each other and went, he kind of thought he was going to stand up or something. Nope. He just slid under. Couple jumped in there, pulled him out, put him back on the motorhome. He went home.
That was just like that.
Yeah, just
oh
like
my
that.
gosh.
Just like taking
That's too
him home.
funny.
Oh. They were a group.
I can't imagine. And you were part of it.
Oh, well,
I'm
yeah.
sure they have their stories about you too, sir.
Probably. No doubt. No doubt. Some which may be true. Some probably not.
I appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome.
The Havery Show has been brought to you by Heartland Tax and Accounting, 863-385-5020.